Before we talk about issues at home, lots to get across on that front ahead of Parliament this week, but I want to get your reaction to the former Secretary of State there, former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Colin Powell. It was a scathing critique of the President.
Yes, g'day, Kieran. It certainly was. Colin Powell has largely kept his own counsel through all of this. He wasn't one of the former generals or admirals who had written letters about this and gone public before. But when he did weigh in, I mean, it was no secret that he was no fan of Donald Trump's and had not backed him in 2016. But his comments now, I think, are calculated to convey the maximum concern that he has about the probity, integrity, the character of the president. He singled him out, saying he's worked for or served under 4 or 5 presidents. He would never have used the term liar before in relation to any of the others, even though in politics, of course, truths do get manipulated from time to time. But what he's saying about Donald Trump is that he lies habitually, and that he gets away with it. His base puts up with anything. He says he's drifting away from the Constitution. I think we can read into that that he's using a bit of understatement there. And there is great concern. I mean, we see some of the names that have been mentioned, John Allen, John Kelly, of course, the former Defence Secretary, James Mattis, a number of very prominent people who you would say are part of the conservative establishment, generally hawks when it comes to US security and those sorts of questions, but they are just absolutely appalled at the way this president conducts himself, the threats to use the military against the civilian population, the absolute disregard for conventions, and I think particularly the concern of all of them is that and I think it was John Kelly who said this. There is no attempt, not even a pretense by the president, to unite the country at a time of crisis. That's the real concern, that he is openly dividing the country for his partisan gain in this election year and doing enormous damage to the fabric of American society.
And the election is just around the corner now, less than 5 months till what is going to be a huge election, not just for the United States, but our own alliance with the US, relations more broadly. Will the US continue to withdraw from its traditional role in our region and elsewhere under Donald Trump, or will Joe Biden win? The polls suggest Biden is just in front, but you can understand why we're all sceptical about the polling given the last experience.
Yeah, that's true. And it's always difficult polling at any time, but particularly when you have voluntary voting, when it's not compulsory to turn up at the polling booth. I think the important question about Trump is whether he can win. There's no doubt that his base puts up with just about anything. It is really quite astonishing, the abuses of power, the absolute abrogation of leadership, and the disgraceful personal behaviour that we've seen from the president. It doesn't seem to affect his base, which is a strong component of which is, of course, the Christian right, which seems to put up with anything, including waving a Bible around after, threatening military action against American citizens, denying them of their constitutional rights and so forth. But the interesting question will be, has he actually in any way expanded his base? I don't see any evidence of that. Now, bearing in mind that at the election in 2016, even the Trump campaign had booked a relatively modest venue for election night because he did not expect to win, they did not expect to win. But nonetheless, they did. I think the question really is Trump now more successful in motivating people to come out and vote against him as he is at motivating people to come out and vote for him? His base is there, but has it grown? I think the base against him has grown, and I think we can see that written in a million ways across US society at the moment.
And the other question that remains, will he accept the result if it doesn't go as he hoped? Now, let's look at the childcare issue if we can, because free childcare ends from July 12, Mark Kenny, and the government shifting those workers in that sector off JobKeeper. So the first in, I guess, a number of sectors where we will see some change to that JobKeeper framework.
Yeah, it is, and I'm a little bit mystified about this because I saw a snippet from the interview you're running later with Dan Tehan, the Education Minister, the Minister responsible here. And look, I might be doing him a disservice. I only saw a grab from it, but it seemed to me that he was saying, in respect of this question about withdrawing JobKeeper from this sector, that the JobKeeper program was always to be reviewed. Well, that is true, but that review is to get underway in this month and report next month. It seems that they've gone ahead anyway with, in as much as it affects this sector. Now, there may be some logic to that, and it may be further explained in the interview. Maybe you can tell me about that, but it's pretty clear that they are now moving into that phase where they believe that some of these planks of assistance can be wound back, and that's quite telling, particularly when we see what's gone on in New Zealand today, where there's been a quite dramatic unwinding of the restrictions there. They've had tighter restrictions than us in some respects, but they're now moving really to a situation where the only restriction they've got is their borders.
Yeah, indeed. That's a huge development there. And on the childcare staff front, the JobKeeper front, he believes that the sector, he repeated it a number of times, that they worked closely with the sector, and that's the approach that they wanted, and that's what they believe will drive demand. But as you alluded to, that full interview coming up at just after 4 o'clock Canberra time. Now, let's just finish on the Parliament returning this week, because the goodwill, the sort of bipartisanship that we saw in the eye of this crisis is certainly, or the eye of the storm, is now no longer there, and particularly the case as we head into July 4 and that important by-election.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, obviously, we've just been talking about the sort of return of, at whatever pace, of business and economics in normal sort of social interaction. I guess we're going to see the same thing in terms of politics. We've had a lot of bipartisanship, a lot of both sides rowing in the same direction and all that kind of thing. But we will see much more contestation in our politics, which is a return to normal service. I expect the opposition to be very seriously prosecuting the argument about robo-debt, talking about who was at fault there, given the government's, kind of meek Friday afternoon back down a couple of Fridays ago. So it's going to be interesting just to see how that plays out and the extent to which there is any lingering goodwill, let's put it that way, in the political system as we come out of this. Because there could be bumps in the road, as they say in politics, yet. I mean, we'll see other infections. We've just been talking a lot about whether the demonstrations, the protests on the weekend will themselves be the cause of another spike in infections. We all hope that's not the case, but if it is, you can be sure that will become politicised as well. And of course, that will have an effect on the attitudes of the states who are in charge of a lot of the most severe restrictions that apply at the moment, particularly the closed state borders in a place like Queensland.
Yeah, good point, and look forward to discussing the events of this parliamentary week when it resumes on Wednesday with you later. Thank you, Mark Kenny, Professor at the ANU's Australian Studies Institute.